You are now listening to 1 Timothy 4:13 Project with the undershepherds of the Cathedral of Praise Philippines, Pastor David E. Sumrall and Sister Beverley Sumrall with Pastora Alisha Sumrall-Lozano.
Good evening. Welcome again to Project 1 Timothy chapter 4. I'm Pastor Sumrall, the pastor of the Cathedral of Praise, and thank you again for the privilege of allowing Sister Bev and Pastor A and I the privilege of coming into your home every night and reading the scriptures with you. You could be doing a lot of things, but you allow us to be a part of your life and to be good shepherds, because sheep don't eat once a week. So this gives us an opportunity to make sure that you're eating spiritual things on a regular basis. We're going to move right into Exodus chapter 21 tonight, but first Pastor A has some wisdom for us from the Book of Proverbs.
Welcome everyone, I'm Pastora A, and today we are stepping into the Book of Proverbs where God's wisdom meets daily life. Let's get started. Proverbs 3 verse 33 to 34. The Lord curses the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the upright. The Lord mocks the mockers, but is gracious to the humble. We see so many of these opposites, right? God hates this, but loves this. God blesses this, but punishes this. Now, we all want our homes to be blessed, right? We want our lives to be blessed. We need to recognize that God treats the home of a wicked person very different than the home of a righteous. Now, God has made very specific promises about the home of the wicked. He says he's not going to take note of good behavior, but in fact, he's going to take note of their bad behavior and bring it to ruin. God says he places a curse upon the house of the wicked. Now, the Hebrew word here for the word house simply refers to a dwelling place. It's a very limited and focused term, meaning God's curse comes upon the dwelling place of a wicked person. No matter how people try and help someone who might be wicked, there is going to come a day in which their house is going to crumble because it cannot stand. But notice the opposite. God blesses the home of the righteous. It says in verse 33, the Lord curses the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the righteous. Now, what I love and what I mark up in my Bible when I see this passage is I go, yeah, that's right, because you cannot curse what the Lord has blessed. And when God is blessing you, you will be blessed indeed. Now, God brings blessing to the house of the righteous. Now, the Hebrew word for home and the Hebrew word for house is actually a very expansive term in their usage. It means a pasturage, the residence, the abode, the settlement, the habitation, basically meaning God's blessing is upon your home, your business, your property when you are righteous. So we asked at the beginning, how many of you want to be blessed? We all want that. If you want to be blessed, then you need to live a righteous life. It does not matter what people try to do against you. They cannot destroy what God has blessed. But your actions are going to determine what is going to flow in your life with your relationship with God. So let me ask you this. Are you living a life that God can bless? Now let's head over to Pastor Sumrall.
Our Old Testament passage tonight picks up in Exodus chapter 21, verse 1. Now, we're beginning to have some laws laid out here. And people don't understand why God did this. Was he just trying to make their life difficult? No. These people have been slaves for 400 years. They have no idea how to run a nation. They had no idea how to have a judicial system. They had no idea how to have a justice system. So part of the Old Testament Mosaic law is ceremonial, pointing to Jesus. Part of the Old Testament law is just good principles on how to treat people and how to set up a justice system. So don't get stumbled by some of this. He's trying to teach people in an agricultural society how to treat each other fairly. Chapter 21, verse 1. These are the regulations you must present to Israel. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve for no more than 6 years. Set him free in the 7th year, and he will owe you nothing for his freedom. In other words, you couldn't keep one of your own kababayan, a slave, long term. If he was single when he became your slave, he shall leave single. But if he was married before he became a slave, then his wife must be freed with him. If his master gave him a wife while he was a slave, and they had sons or daughters, then only the man will be free in the 7th year, but his wife and children will still belong to the master. But the slave may declare, I love my master, my wife, and my children, and I don't want to be free. If he does this, his master must present him before God. In other words, before God, this man has to say, I want to continue as a slave. Then his master must take him to the door or doorpost and publicly pierce his ear with an awl. After that, the slave will serve his master for life. This is what we call a love slave, and this is what Paul calls himself in his relationship with the master. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she will not be freed at the end of 6 years as the men are. If she does not satisfy her owner, he must allow her to be bought back again. But if he is not allowed to sell her to foreigners, since he is the one who broke the contract with her. But if the slave's owner arranges for her to marry his son, he may no longer treat her as a slave, but as a daughter. And if a man who has been married to a slave takes another wife for himself, he must not neglect the rights of the first wife to food, clothing, and sexual intimacy. Now notice the 3 rights of a wife. 3 rights of a wife. The wife has a right to food, she has a right to clothing, and she has a right to sexual intimacy. If he fails in any of these 3 obligations, she may leave as a freed woman without making any payment. Anyone who assaults and kills another person must be put to death. Now, here's the death penalty for murder that we saw in Genesis is caused by the fact that we were created in God's image. And even if an animal kills a human being, the animal must be put to death. But if we're simply an accident permitted by God, I will appoint a place of refuge where the slayer can run for safety. These will later be called the cities of refuge, and they literally later became the cities where the Levites lived. However, if someone deliberately kills another person, then the slayer must be dragged even from my altar and be put to death. Now, you see that fulfilled when Solomon takes over as king, and he goes and he drags Joab from the horns of the altar and slays him. Anyone who strikes father or mother must be put to death. Okay, young people, here's death penalty for striking your parents. Kidnappers must be put to death, all right, the death penalty for kidnapping, whether they are caught in possession of their victims or have already sold them as slaves. Anyone who dishonors his father or mother must be put to death. Okay, death penalty for dishonoring your family. Wow, there's some strong things here, folks. Young people, aren't you glad that you don't live by the Mosaic law today? Now suppose 2 men quarrel, and one hits the other with a stone or fist, and the injured person does not die but is confined to bed. If he is later able to walk outside again, even with a crutch, his assailant will not be punished, but must compensate his victim for lost wages and provide for his full recovery. All right, so here is making things right. Now, sometimes you get in a fight with people and you hurt them. Now listen, you got to make it right. You can't just walk up and say, please forgive me. You had to pay his downtime from work, and you had to pay what it would cost him to do all the medical treatment, his full recovery. If a man beats his male or female slave with a club and the slave dies as a result, the owner must be punished. In other words, you don't have a right to take a person's life just because they're a slave. But if the slave recovers within a day or 2, then the owner shall not be punished, since the slave is his property. Now, those are some of those verses we struggle with. I was raised very, very anti-slavery. I can't even imagine. But also understand that slavery in that day was very different than slavery that we read about in recent history. Now suppose 2 men are fighting, and in the process they accidentally strike a pregnant woman so that she gives birth prematurely. If no further injury results, the man who struck the woman must pay the amount of compensation and the woman's husband demands, and the judges approve. Now notice, we have both a demand and an approval. So there is fairness in this compensation. But if there is further injury, the punishment must match the injury, a life for life. An eye for eye, a tooth for tooth, a hand for hand, a foot for foot, a burn for burn, a wound for wound, a bruise for bruise. So, okay, if you've done something like this, then you know what? You had to make it right. You had to at least make it even. If you broke a person's tooth, you lose your tooth. Okay. If a man hits his male or female slave in the eye and the eye is blinded, he must let the slave go free to compensate for the eye. If a man knocks out the tooth of his male or female slave, he must let the slave go free to compensate for the tooth. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox must be stoned. Okay, this is death penalty for animals, and his flesh may not be eaten. In such case, however, the owner will not be held liable. So, if you have an animal that runs wild and kills somebody, you're not responsible. However, but suppose the ox had a reputation for goring, and the owner had been informed but failed to keep it under control. If the ox then kills someone, it must be stoned, and the owner must also be put to death. All right, so there's death penalties here because you murdered somebody. Well, yeah, but I didn't murder them. My ox did, yes, but you knew that your ox was dangerous. Now, the principle is what you want to learn here. You are responsible to keep under control what you control. Let me say that again. You are responsible to keep under control what you control. Verse 30. However, the dead person's relatives may accept a payment to compensate for the loss of life. The owner of the ox may redeem his life by paying whatever is demanded. Now notice, here we don't have judges asking for extra and trying to keep everything reasonable. So this is going to be very different than verse 22. The same regulation applies if an ox gores a boy or a girl. But if the ox gores a slave, either male or female, the animal's owners may pay the slave owner 30 silver coins, and the ox must be stoned. Suppose someone digs or uncovers a pit and fails to cover it. Then an ox or donkey falls into it. The owner of the pit must pay full compensation to the owner of the animal, but he gets to keep the dead animal. If someone's ox injures a neighbor's ox and the injured ox dies, then the two owners must sell the live ox and divide the price equally between them. They must also divide the dead animal. But if the ox has a reputation for goring, he must pay full compensation, a live ox for the dead one, but he may keep the dead ox. Again, knowledge makes you responsible. Chapter 22, verse 1. If someone steals an ox or sheep and then kills or sells it, the thief must pay back 5 oxen for each ox stolen and 4 sheep for each sheep stolen. Okay? So notice he kills or sells it, so he disposes of it. That's a very high penalty. If a thief is caught in the act of breaking into the house and is struck and killed in the process, the person who killed the thief is not guilty of murder. But if it happens in daylight, the one who killed the thief is guilty of murder. Now, you say, why is the difference? Well, because at night, you remember there's no electricity, it's dark, you can't see what's going on, there's going to be a very violent fight, nobody's awake, there's nobody you can crawl out to and ask for help. But in the daytime, you can see exactly your situation, you can see exactly what's going on, you can see what weapons they have, and you can cry out for help from somebody. But if it happens in daylight, the one who killed the thief is guilty of murder. A thief who is caught must pay in full for everything he sold. If he cannot pay, he must be sold as a slave to pay for his death. All right, so this is make it right. You say, well, why does it just say pay in full here, but earlier it says pay back 5 times? He disposed of it. He profited from it. If someone steals an ox or a donkey or a sheep and it is found in the thief's possession, then the thief must pay double the value of the stolen animal. If an animal is grazing in a field or vineyard, and the owner lets it stray into someone else's field to graze, then the owners must pay compensation from the best of his own grain or grapes. Again, make people whole, make it right, compensate, but don't compensate with junk, compensate from the best. If you are burning thorn bushes and the fire gets out of control and spreads into the other person's field, destroying the sheaves or the uncut grain or the whole crop, the one who started the fire must pay for the lost crop. Now notice, not the owner of the field where the fire came from, but the person who started the fire, the person responsible for the fire. Suppose someone leaves money or goods with the neighbor for safekeeping, and they are stolen from the neighbor's house. If the thief is caught, the compensation is double the value of what was stolen. But if the thief is not caught, the neighbor must appear before God, who will determine if he stole the property. They come before the high priest, the Urim and the Thummim are brought out, and God shows the reality. Suppose there is a dispute between 2 people who both claim to own a particular ox, donkey, sheep, article of clothing, or any lost property. Both parties must come before God, and the person whom God declares guilty must pay double compensation to the other. Now again, this is dealing with the reality of God. They would come before the presence. The high priest would be there with the Urim and Thummim and make judgment. Now suppose someone leaves a donkey, ox, or sheep, or any other animal with a neighbor for safekeeping, but it dies or is injured or is taken away, and no one sees what happened. The neighbor must then take an oath in the presence of the Lord. If the Lord confirms that the neighbor did not steal the property, the owner must accept the verdict, and no payment must be required. All right? So the verdict comes from the presence. He said, you come before the Lord, and God tells you who is guilty. Again, the high priest is there with his Urim and Thummim, but the person must accept it. It's kind of like arbitration. You can't go through the full aspect of an arbitration and then say, no, I don't accept it. Okay. But if the animal was indeed stolen, the guilty person must pay compensation to the owner. If it was torn to pieces by a wild animal, the remains of the carcass must be shown as evidence, and no compensation is required. Again, why? Because you weren't responsible. You can't control a bear or a lion. at least in those days. If someone borrows an animal from a neighbor and it is injured or dies when the owner is absent, the person who borrowed it must pay full compensation, the value of the animal. But if the owner was present, no compensation is required, and no compensation is required if the animal was rented, for his loss is covered by the rental fee. So God is dealing with a full, detailed justice system here. Verse 16, if a man seduces a virgin, now, I didn't say rapes her, it says seduces. Now, there's a big difference here, okay? There are guys who can just talk their way into bed with a woman. I've never figured those guys out, but there are guys that are really good at this. If a man seduces a virgin, now again, this is not rape, who is not engaged to anyone and has sex with her, he must pay the customary bride price and marry her. So you just can't go out and have sex with these girls and not be responsible. But if her father refuses to let him marry her, the man must still pay him the amount equal to the bride price of a virgin. Okay, so sometimes the father says, no, I don't want this guy in my family, but you still have to pay the bride price. But if her father refuses to let him marry her, the man must pay him the amount equal to the bride price of a virgin. You must not allow a sorceress to live, so there can be no witchcraft within Israel. He said, I don't want you to allow a sorceress to live. Anyone who has sexual relationships with an animal must be put to death. Now again, here's death penalty. You can't be out having sex with the sheep and the goats and the big dogs. You can't be doing this, male or female. Anyone who sacrifices to a god other than the Lord must be destroyed. So again, we have the death penalty. You must not mistreat or oppress foreigners in any way. Remember, you yourselves were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. Now, he said, never forget your past. And this is so important, beloved. He's teaching them as part of their justice system, never forget your past. You were mistreated. That's how Egypt treated you. But he said, that does not give you the right to treat others that way. Now, there's a principle there. How other people treat us does not give us the right to treat other people that way. Don't mistreat or oppress foreigners in any way. Remember, you yourselves were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. You must not exploit a widow or an orphan. If you exploit them in any way, and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will blaze against you, and I will kill you with the sword. Then your wives will be widows, and your children will be fatherless. Now here's reaping what you sow. This is justice. This is reaping what you sow. You exploited widows and orphans. God says you're going to die, and your wife and your children are going to see what it feels like. Now that's a harsh thing. But I watch so much today. I watch these cons. Some of them are Christian cons. The CCs, CCAs, Christian con artists. And they go around with their gimmicks and their Facebook things and their text messages. They take advantage of widows. They promise them big returns on their investment. Their widows are concerned about how long their money will last, and they take advantage. That is a horrible thing to sow within your life. Verse 25, if you lend money to any of my people who are in need, do not charge interest as a moneylender would. I like that. No interest to God's people. Now, I know the banks always charge us interest, but look at that. God says, I don't want you to take advantage of people when they're down. And this is a principle of justice among them. If you take your neighbor's cloak as security for a loan, you must return it before sunset. This coat may be the only blanket your neighbor has. How can that person sleep without it? If you do not return it and your neighbor cries out to me for help, then I will hear, for I am merciful. God said, listen, I don't want the people to be cold and get sick at night because they had to mortgage their cloak for a week while they got some money. Verse 28, you must not dishonor God or curse any of your rulers. Wow. You must not dishonor God, must not dishonor God, and you must not curse any of your rulers, any of your leadership. Now, this is from the very beginning. Now, as you see the story of Israel unfold in the wilderness, you'll find that they violated this constantly. Verse 29, you must not hold anything back when you give me offerings from your crops or your wine. You must give me your firstborn sons, and you must also give me the firstborn of your cattle, sheep, and goats. But leave the newborn animal with its mother for 7 days, then give it to me on the 8th day. Now, beautiful truth. Don't hold back your offerings. When God has given you seed to sow, when God has blessed the work of your hands, don't hold back the offerings. Now, I wish I could let people see that's not money raising. That's a partnership that you have with God in sowing and reaping. So this is not money raising. This is partnership. Verse 31, you must be my holy people. Therefore do not eat any animal that has been torn up and killed by wild animals. Throw it to the dogs. Now, part of this in here is mercy. Don't take a baby animal away from its mother for 7 days. Let the mother spend time with the baby. Let there be the proper natural thing happening. And don't eat scavenged food. We're not pigs. We're not vultures. Now, a dog's stomach was built to handle that. Yours was not. Chapter 23. Verse 1. You must not pass along false rumors. Wow. There's Facebook. There's Instagram. There's TikTok. Don't pass on false rumors. There's so much. I think there's more lies out there in social media than there is truth, especially now in the days of AI. Don't pass on false rumors. If you don't know something to be true, don't repeat it. Don't destroy other people because somebody has created a tsunami of gossip coming against them with social media. In today's world, I see this so often. I see good people destroyed, young people destroyed by, they call it bullying in high school and college. But the bullying is not just for the high school and college. The bullying is with preachers today. It's with good Christian people today that somebody doesn't like. It's with somebody who gets a promotion in the office and people are jealous. Unless you know something to be true, don't pass it on. He said, you must not cooperate with evil people by lying on the witness stand. When you pass on evil stuff, when you lie, you're cooperating with evil people. You must not follow the crowd in doing wrong. All right? So here's peer pressure. When you are called to testify in a dispute, do not be swayed by the crowd to twist justice. Do not slant your testimony in favor of a person just because that person is poor. So rich people have rights also. He said, hey, don't just twist things around because the person's poor and you feel sorry for them. If you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey that is strayed away, take it back to its owner. Now notice, an enemy's property. If you have an opportunity to bless your enemy and help your enemy, do it. Don't look at it as an opportunity to get even. If you see that a donkey of someone who hates you has collapsed under its load, don't walk by, stop and help. Okay, again, this is how to treat people who hate you. In a lawsuit, you must not deny justice to the poor. All right, now we've already talked about we don't preference the poor and lie because they're poor, nor do we deny justice to the poor, so it has to go both ways. Be sure never to charge anyone falsely with evil. Never sentence an innocent or blameless person to death, for I will never declare a guilty person to be innocent. See, God is a God of justice. He said, I'll never declare an innocent person guilty, and I'll never declare a guilty person innocent. Take no bribes, for a bribe makes you ignore something that you clearly see. A bribe makes even a righteous person twist the truth. Now, if you ever wonder why God hates bribes, it's because bribes change even good people. Now, let me say that again. Bribes change even good people, a righteous person. The reason bribes are so dangerous and destructive to companies and to nations is because bribes change how you see things. You just all of a sudden can't see something, and normally you would catch it. Normally you would know that this is not the right decision, but it changes you on the inside so that you don't see something. Things that you normally would clearly see, you ignore it. And the bribe changes you so that trying to justify your bad decision, you twist the truth. Now understand, when people give you money, people always ask me, what's the difference between a commission and a bribe? What's the difference between a gift and a bribe? Well, are they asking you to make a decision in their favor? Are they offering you 10% so that you'll give the contract to them? And so you make what is not the best decision and you twist it so that it looks like the best decision. You justify it in your mind, but you know it's not. Now, beloved, anytime someone gives you a gift or offers you, quote, commission, or offers you return to sender, and it's standard operating, and you know they're seeking to influence a decision, that's when a gift becomes a bribe. Now, if a person walks up to you on your birthday and they have no business dealings with you, and they walk up and they give you a beautiful gift, that's not a bribe. If a person walks up at Christmas time and they give you a beautiful gift just because it's Christmas and they want to bless you and they're your friend, that's not a bribe. But if a supplier or a person that your company does business with comes up to you at Christmas time or your birthday and offers you a BMW or offers you a free trip overseas because you're the one who signs the contracts, now you're dealing with a bribe. How can you tell the difference? Just like I showed you. Are they seeking to influence a decision, or do they just love you? Now look at verse 9. You must not oppress foreigners. You know what it's like to be a foreigner, for you yourselves were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. So twice God comes out and says that. Twice he looks at us and says, don't take advantage of the foreigners. Remember how you were treated. Don't forget where you came from. We see that again in verse 21 and in chapter 23, verse 9. Now again, the principle is so strong because we are creatures of habit. We do to others what others have done to us. When Jesus turned it around and Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. All right, so Jesus flips it. The world says, treat other people like other people treat you. Jesus said, treat other people like you want them to treat you. Father, as we read these Old Testament laws, there's so much practicality here. So don't get lost in the nuances. Instead, learn the principles. There are principles here of relationship. Father, sometimes in Christianity, everybody wants to live as if there are no consequences. They want to live in the realm of forgiveness without compensation. They want to live in the realm of forgiven, but never making things right. They want to penalize a person twice. Father, I ask in Jesus' name, give us hearts that recognize that when we do wrong, we need to make it right. Give us hearts that recognize, Father, that we need to make people whole. We need to make their businesses whole. We need to make things right with people. Teach us, Father, not just forgiveness, but teach us the integrity of making things right. In Jesus' name. God bless you. Good night. We'll see you again tomorrow night.
Thank you for joining us today on the 1 Timothy 4:13 project with the under-shepherds of the Cathedral of Praise Philippines, Pastor David E. Sumrall and Sister Beverley Sumrall with Pastora Alisha Sumrall-Lozano. Catch their podcasts on all leading podcast platforms and listen through DZBR 531 or tune in online at www.bible.radio. The Cathedral of Praise is a church fully committed to Jesus Christ and His Word. Our main campus is located at 350 Taft Avenue, Metro Manila, Philippines. For a full list of COP campus locations and service schedules, visit us at cathedralofpraisemanila.com.ph. Tune in again tomorrow for another inspiring reading from the Old Testament and Proverbs.